In this movie, a plane crashes, a plane packed entirely with dangerous, cold-blooded criminals. The crash happens in a place so remote and hostile that escaping from there seems absolutely impossible. At the start of the movie, we see a passenger aircraft filled with prisoners. Two policemen escort a heavily guarded criminal into the cabin. The man's hands and legs are bound tightly with iron chains. His head is covered with a thick hood, and his ears are sealed with something like headphones, so he can't hear a thing. Even his eyes are covered with special goggles, preventing him from seeing anything at all. He is seated on a specially reinforced chair, wrapped in steel pipes, with two armed officers standing guard on either side. It's clear, among all these violent criminals, this man is the most dangerous, the most important of them all. The plane continues flying for hours. Gradually, both the guards and prisoners start to doze off from exhaustion. That's when the dangerous criminal quietly pulls out a thin piece of wire he had hidden somewhere on his body. Slowly, he begins to pick the lock on his handcuffs. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocks the plane. The deafening blast jolts everyone awake. A huge hole tears open in the aircraft's fuselage, and the cabin is instantly filled with howling wind. The pressure difference starts pulling everything toward the breach, and the hole keeps widening. The pilot panics and desperately tries to lower the altitude, but the violent air currents rip two prisoners, still strapped to their seats, straight out of the plane. Several guards are sucked out too, screaming into the open sky. Chaos erupts inside, pure panic everywhere. One prisoner takes advantage of the mayhem. He lunges toward a fallen guard, trying to snatch the keys from his belt. It's a deadly risk, but the perfect chance to escape. Just as he grabs the keys, he loses balance and falls through the open hole. In that split second, the dangerous criminal snatches the keys right out of his hands before he disappears into the storm. Meanwhile, far below on the ground, a father and his young son are waiting in the cold night to see the northern lights. The boy sighs sadly. He hasn't been able to see them this year either. The father smiles gently and says, "The northern lights are always up there, son. Maybe next year we'll get lucky." They have no idea that within moments, they'll witness something far more terrifying than the aurora. Back in the air, the pilots are struggling to regain control. They reduce altitude and speed, slowly stabilizing the air pressure inside. That's when the dangerous prisoner finally unlocks his cuffs completely. Several policemen rush to stop him, but to their horror, despite all the restraints, the man moves with inhuman speed and precision. In just a few swift strikes, he knocks every officer unconscious. Meanwhile, the plane's tail section loses all control, and the aircraft starts plummeting toward the earth. The prisoners, still strapped to their seats, float weightlessly in midair. Everything feels like slow motion. The dangerous criminal drifts through the zero-gravity chaos, moving from the rear of the plane toward the cockpit. Inside, the two pilots are frantically trying to stabilize the aircraft when suddenly, the prisoner grabs the control stick. The descent stops. Slowly, the plane's nose lifts upward again. Now standing in the aisle, the prisoner removes the hood from his head, revealing his face for the first time as he calmly surveys the chaos around him. Despite the pilot's best efforts, the out-of-control aircraft could no longer take flight. In the end, he was forced to bring it down toward the ground. Fortunately, there was an open snowfield below. The thick, soft snow absorbed much of the impact from the massive fuselage, preventing what could have been a catastrophic explosion during the emergency landing. After the crash, a few surviving prisoners seized the moment. They quickly turned on the remaining policemen aboard, attacking them viciously. For them, this was the perfect chance to reclaim their freedom. Meanwhile, at an Alaska police station, an officer named Frank received an urgent distress call. The caller reported that thick black smoke was rising from a forest roughly 10 kilometers away from the station. At first, Frank assumed it was just a forest fire. He immediately gathered a small team and took off in a helicopter toward the location. But when they arrived, the sight before them was shocking. A passenger plane had crashed right there in the snowy wilderness. Frank and his team quickly landed and began searching the area cautiously. The ground was littered with bodies. Everywhere they looked, there were corpses buried in the snow. Then one of Frank's men suddenly shouted. He had spotted a policeman still alive, though the man's hands were chained to a wooden post. As the officer approached to help, the blood-soaked policeman raised his head weakly and whispered a warning. "It's an ambush." Before they could react, several prisoners emerged from the snow-covered woods. Realizing the danger, two officers lifted the injured man and rushed toward the helicopter, but their path was quickly blocked by the convicts. A brutal fight broke out across the icy ground. The prisoners outnumbered the police, and within moments, one officer was stabbed and collapsed onto the snow. The criminals then turned on another officer, capturing him as a hostage to force Frank into surrendering his weapon. A tense standoff followed, until Frank noticed a wounded prisoner on the ground reaching for a fallen gun. Acting on instinct, Frank fired a single shot, killing the man instantly. After neutralizing the nearby attackers, Frank helped his injured partner and began moving toward the helicopter. But the remaining convicts charged at them again. They knew this was their last shot at freedom, and they didn't care about bullets anymore. Armed with wooden clubs and makeshift weapons, they rushed the officers. Frank kept firing relentlessly, but as he tried to reload, one of the prisoners lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. Frank was in serious danger. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out. The prisoner attacking Frank was shot dead on the spot. Frank turned to look. It was a prison guard, his eyes badly injured, but he had managed to fire just in time to save Frank's life. The guard, however, was too weak to defend himself and was quickly surrounded again by convicts. Seeing this, Frank got up and fought back fiercely, managing to rescue the wounded guard. At this point, Frank realized his ammo was nearly gone. He shouted for everyone to fall back to the helicopter. The surviving officers scrambled toward it, and Frank ordered immediate takeoff. But before they could ascend, the prisoners reached the chopper, grabbing onto the doors and trying to take control. The officers fought back desperately, risking their lives in close combat. Somehow, they managed to push the attackers away and lift off just in time. When the helicopter finally returned to the police station, the exhausted and injured guard gave Frank a crucial piece of information. His name was Arthur. Arthur told Frank the full story behind the crashed plane. That aircraft had been specially designed to transport high-profile, extremely dangerous criminals. During the transport mission, the crew suddenly received a new directive to take on one additional prisoner, a man of very special status. When Frank asked about this criminal's identity and appearance, Arthur replied helplessly that the man's identity was top secret. He had been restrained in multiple layers of security, bound in heavy chains, his head covered with a hood, so no one had ever seen his real face. Arthur only knew his name, Haverlock, and according to him, it was Haverlock who had sabotaged the plane's systems, causing the explosion mid-flight. That dangerous man wasn't just any criminal. He was a former top CIA agent, once among their best. But later, he was arrested on charges of treason and leaking classified information. Sometime later, Elodie, an intelligence officer, arrived at the Alaskan crash site in a small aircraft. After conducting an initial investigation, she discovered that the plane had been carrying 52 prisoners in total, of which 23 were dead, 11 were captured, and 18 were missing or on the run. When Elodie learned that a surviving prison guard was still alive, she requested to meet him. However, Frank informed her that the guard's condition was critical and that he was being treated in a hospital, so he denied the request. Elodie then shared what she knew about Haverlock. She revealed that there was a dangerous insider within the CIA, someone who had been continuously transmitting classified data to foreign entities. His expertise in artificial intelligence and advanced technology was so formidable that he had already destroyed several major government systems. In truth, Haverlock had been part of a classified CIA project, one that trained alpha-level agents, operatives enhanced through rigorous mental, technical, and linguistic conditioning, designed to function as living weapons. Over the past 2 years, Haverlock had begun using CIA intelligence for his own personal agenda, eliminating targets across Europe, operating entirely beyond the agency's control. Eventually, he vanished. That was when the CIA finally realized their creation had turned against them. Elodie concluded that whatever Haverlock's next plan was, it all began aboard that sky prison flying 30,000 meters above the Earth. The following day, the meteorological department reported something unusual to the police. Communication had been lost with one of their observatory stations located 30 kilometers. On foot through such brutal, frozen terrain was nearly impossible. Elodie calmly replied, "Haverlock isn't just another man, Frank. He's a specially trained operative, built for endurance, for survival. If anyone could make it through this ice, it's him." She then urged Frank to accompany her to the observatory so they could uncover the truth together. In a restricted zone of the United States, CIA operatives had no authority to carry out law enforcement. As they approached the surveillance outpost, Frank firmly ordered Elodie to hand over her firearm. Although Elodie was a senior CIA agent, she had to obey local Alaskan law, so reluctantly, she surrendered her gun to Frank. Frank then advanced toward the observatory with his police team. During their search, they found blood-stained clothes, and soon after, they discovered a meteorological officer tied up in a corner. Suddenly, Haverlock appeared from behind and opened fire, shooting 2 policemen before swiftly snatching one of their shotguns. Hearing the gunshots, Frank, who was outside, rushed in with the remaining officers. But as they reached the door, a heavy blast of shotgun fire forced them back. Frank narrowly avoided being hit, just 1 second slower, and he would have been dead. Meanwhile, Elodie had also heard the gunfire. Since she was unarmed, she grabbed an axe lying nearby and charged toward the fight. However, when the officers finally breached the door, the room was empty. Haverlock had vanished. Then, the sound of dogs barking echoed from outside. Everyone ran out and saw Haverlock holding the observatory worker hostage. The police tried to negotiate, pleading with him to drop his weapon and surrender peacefully. But Elodie shouted a single order: "Shoot him." The officers hesitated. No one pulled the trigger. That's when Elodie noticed a chained dog nearby, barking frantically. She immediately swung her axe, cutting the chain loose. The dog charged straight toward Haverlock, leaping onto him and knocking him to the ground. In a violent struggle, the animal tore through his throat.